I'm Rob Dansman, and this is the Better Semester, where I provide insight and actionable advice to parents of college students. I'm a nationally certified counselor and licensed clinical mental health counselor, specializing in work with college students and their parents to improve mental health, organization, and motivation. B, Tony, thank you so much for joining me. How are you all doing?
Great.
Good. So much for having us.
Really looking forward to our conversation.
So am I. We've got a lot to cover. I don't think we're going to get to everything because there's just so much to talk about. But I'd really like to start off by hearing about what you all do day to day, how you all work together, where you all work, and maybe a little bit of your background.
So, Tony, you have the, I would say, biggest kind of, what you do every day. So please go ahead and then I'll follow.
Well, okay. So first of all, I'm the chairman of psychiatry and behavioral health at Cooper University Healthcare and Cooper Medical School of Rowan University. I've been here almost 5 years. It's sort of a new job for me still, still learning. I spend a fair amount of my time still seeing patients, and the area that I focus a lot on is this transitional age youth. Tend to see youth with neurodevelopmental challenges, executive function difficulties, ADHD. We can give the diagnoses, but what's the theme about the patients that I treat are that they're neurodivergent in some way, and they have challenges with daily life or with growing up. Um, the other thing I do is teach a lot, and I really enjoy that. And my role in the chair is also to train people to take over the healthcare uh, system at some point, and we're bringing together lots of young people here with new ideas. So I'm really lucky that I'm involved in a change process in a community mental health center that's become an academic medical center and that wants to serve the needs of the community, Camden and South Jersey. So as I see it, my basic daily job is to serve, to heal, to educate, because that's the motto of Cooper. And I remind that myself as I'm driving into work every day. Here's my chance to serve, to heal, and to educate.
And let me clarify. So your background is in psychiatry. Is that
Okay,
correct?
yeah. So, like, just a quick thumbnail. I started off before going to medical school. I was a high school teacher in New Haven, Connecticut, and I was struck by the number of kids in my classroom who had both health and mental health challenges. I was teaching biology. I was trying to get them to think about their health and their well-being, and it occurred to me that I'd probably be better off going to medical school and becoming a pediatrician. So I went to NYU Medical School. Then came to the Children's Hospital Philadelphia, pursuing a goal of becoming a pediatrician and going back to New York. And instead of doing that, I stayed in Philadelphia and I became a child psychiatrist because I realized that the number one health problem facing kids and families was their mental health needs. So I was lucky. I trained at the Philadelphia Child Guidance Clinic. I trained at Penn, and I spent most of my career there at Penn and at CHOP, working, developing programs to serve special needs kids. We started an ADD program. We started a neurodevelopmental disorders program. And I did all that with a lot of passion for my patients, learned a tremendous amount about the process of caring for people whose lives were being affected in some way by mental health challenges. And that's really what I've devoted myself to. And being really an educator at heart, I think that the effort that I've been doing both with B and in this project together is really to move beyond the office into the community and into the public sector and say, hey, everyone, what are we doing about these problems that are affecting our young people? So it's really an effort to offer some insights into how integrated approaches to mental health, such as B and I practice, are important. The other thing I've done is written some books with Russ Ramsey, who's a well-known ADHD psychologist, and I feel lucky that I've been able to work with such talented people as Dr. Hibbs and Dr. Ramsey.
That, but B, before we get to you, Tony, it strikes me that that's such an unfair advantage having that high school education background compared to other psychiatrists. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that I mean that seems to set you apart, I would imagine, from other psychiatrists.
Well, you know what's interesting? A lot of people, before they go to medical school, do teaching, and in particular,
Hmm.
Teach for America has helped a lot of people transition the way I did. But I do think it gives me an advantage because I understand what it's like to be a teacher, what it's like to work with kids in classrooms, and I can picture when my patients are telling me the difficulties they're having. Not only do I think about them, but I think about the teachers and the school they're in, and yeah, it's an ecosystemic view. I guess if you were to say what's besides being a lifespan neurodevelopmental psychiatrist, I think about ecosystems and biopsychosocial, spiritual, and ecological levels of human endeavor and human suffering and disease and disorders. So everything has got to be seen in its context. The other thing that high school teaching taught me was how to really be humble and to listen to what's going on with kids because they have a completely different way of looking at the world than grown-ups do. And so that's kept me, you know, always open to what they have to say. We've got to listen to what kids have to say. If we don't listen to what kids have to say, we're not going to be able to help them.
Right. B, what do you do each day? How do you spend your time?
Currently, I have a private practice and I also dedicate, a couple of days a week, if not more, to writing. And what I guess I'd say, to go back to like, okay, how did I land here? It goes a little bit with how do you choose your career, but very different. It was really more like what grabbed me. So I was always interested in, sociology, psychology, and I started off, in as an what we think of as a clinical, like individual psychologist. Um, it was so depressing in its pathology focus that I signed up for like one of the very few programs in the country at that time that taught family therapy. I was really fortunate that I, met and studied and trained under Ivan Naj, Barbara Krasner, Margaret Cotronio, just as well as like people who taught structural family therapy over at Child Guidance in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. So I moved across the country to go to that program. And after I was in it for a couple of years, I thought I have too much to learn. I can't move back. I moved here from San Antonio. So I stayed in Philadelphia, and I always wanted to kind of combine writing and teaching, but you have to make a living. So I thought, okay, I'll be in. First, I was for many, many years in kind of community service with substance abusers, court ordered addicts. It was really quite an education to learn about like that kind of slice of life and how it affects people and families and that sort of thing. But basically, my training eventually took me to specialize in couples family therapy and in child and adult development because one of the things that I've wanted to kind of bring to light a little bit in our writing, mine with Dr. Rostain, is how we're not just talking about child development and how we can help and that sort of thing as parents and adults. We're talking about the intersection of child and adult development. And we're also really wanting people to understand how the generations can help each other, how they're really crucial in terms of the growth of each generation and mental health. And I think the broader thing that brought Tony and me together these last two books is my son, my younger son, who appears in a chapter in the stress years of their lives with his very generous permission, because he had a breakdown in his freshman year of college, and I asked Tony, please see him. And so it started off as please help me relationship, help me help him. And after that, I was, I had to figure out, well, what did I miss? How did, how did I miss this? Because of everything that parents blame themselves for, you can only imagine if you're in this field and you miss a pretty big red flag that sends your kid to like a crisis mode when they're away at college, that you have to make sense out of it. So Tony and I can talk about that later, but it was quite an interesting enterprise, for Tony and I, with my son's blessing, to say, can we go from like, I need your help to, can you help me write this book? So, anyhow, so that's in a nutshell.
And that was so our relationship had started off as colleagues, for there were some cases that
We
papers
shared,
that B
right?
sent to me or I
Right.
sent to her, so
Right.
we knew each other and from the
Yeah.
field. But this was a watershed change when I began to take care of B's son, and then after he was better, and only with his permission, she said, "Well, would you like to comment on what happened in his care?" And I said, "Sure, I can do that." And then I was invited, at the advice of B's book agent, to actually become a co-author, which had never occurred to me to do. But I have to say, it was such a great partnership we formed in the process and have maintained ever since. Because again, we see this as we're clinicians, yes, but we're also parents and we're humans, and we see the broad need for honest conversations about topics that are very painful, and we don't think it's lecturing is the way to do it. It's really about sharing stories and looking at this in a broader context and understanding why things are the way they are. And I can't agree more with what B said, which is a lesson we learn in family therapy, which is parents are people too. Like they're not just parents, they are humans at a stage in life where they're trying to make sense of the world, and they have other obligations besides their kids, their jobs, maybe taking care of their elderly parents. So seeing it more that way as a chance to reflect with people about this very complicated process of raising adolescents and now young adults in this world.
It also strikes me that you both you, you both sound very curious as individuals, and it's almost like your curiosity came together in the formation of a book.
That's a
Well,
great insight.
yeah, no, that's a good way of putting it. I learned a lot. I dedicated, my part of the dedication of the stressed years to my mother, who was my best advocate ever and taught me how to advocate, and to my children, who taught me what I needed to know and who I needed to become. And I mean it. It's just like, and then so in that spirit, I think Tony and I both, are not preaching to people. We're like saying, we are experts in these areas, but we're also parents, and we've been there and seen it and done it. And so kind of, we wanted to help more than one person at a time, because a limiting factor as a therapist in many ways, is however much you want to be helpful, you're helping the person or people in front of you, unless you're teaching or unless you're writing or lecturing or that sort of thing. And so, I felt a strong need to, help more than one person at a time.
It, it, you
Curiosity is
wanted
certainly curiosity is certainly one of the motives for doing this. We wanted to learn more than we already knew. It was a wonderful opportunity. B and I had great conversations together, reading some books, articles, thinking about the changing paradigms for looking at this age, and the challenges, of course, with the modern world being where it is. And I also would say that that's the same way I approach both my daily life clinically. Is like, I'm really curious, like, what's on your mind when someone comes to see me? It's like, what brings you here, and what are you working on? And also in my important relationships. So I think curiosity is probably the antidote to cynicism or to passivity. You can't be curious and just sit. You have to like inquire and go further. And that's sort of what motivates a lot of what I think we both want to do with this, and including, by the way, finding out what does the book speak to or not speak to in people's experiences, and what else do we need to do to
Right.
broaden that conversation.
How did you all choose? So let's start with the stressed years of their lives, which was the predecessor to, or maybe predecessor to, You're Not Done Yet. Of all the topics that you all could have focused on, tackled, how did you decide on older adolescent, young adult? How did you focus there rather than a specific diagnostic area or another type of population?
First, there were not books out there that were talking about the mental health challenges that adolescents and young adults were going through, and also the pressures that they were under. So there was a whole lot of books on advice about getting into college and what you needed to do and what are the great colleges out there. But it was like, hello, Earth to space. There's a lot of big mental health problems that are going on for this generation. And part of it was that was in the, I would say, the era before it was recognized really as much as a public health problem in terms of youth mental health. And also, Tony, you can speak, obviously, I think from your experience at UPenn, where it was very much a front burner issue.
Yeah, I think right. So first of all, we known forever that transitioning from, say, childhood into adolescence and from adolescence into young adulthood, that transition point is incredibly stressful for kids and for families. I mean, my God, one of the best-selling clinical books about this age was Leaving Home by Jay Haley. The complexity involved in trying to leave home is really important to look at, especially with people who are having trouble. So why we focused on this age group, I just think that this is a group that both B and I were working with, the kids and the families and the parents. And then I was at Penn, and there were a lot of concerns at the time about the rising rates of suicide in young people. There had been some very well publicized cases of young people taking their lives, and there was a crisis response going on. And I was involved in that. I was involved in looking at the contextual factors that were making kids feel so pressured. And we asked questions about access to care, about the notions that kids had about what they needed in order to be well, or to mitigate against what they were all feeling, which was this growing toxic culture of having to perform and perform and perform at the expense of their own sense of who they were. And so out of that came this realization of, wow, young people are turning themselves into commodities and trying to brand themselves and trying to get, in the process, just trying to get into school. And then once they're there, having to show to everybody and put on a pen face, as it was called, to prove that you're okay, when inside you're like, last thing you're doing is feeling good. So this kind of cauldron of both clinical and real world experiences, and the institution that I happen to be working in, led me to say, hey, there isn't anything out there that speaks with this level of specificity to this transition and what is involved, and how do we prepare kids better? Because a lot of the emphasis, as B said, was on getting good grades, doing a lot of extracurriculars, getting your CV or your essays written by whomever, maybe not you, but your parents or a consultant, so that you could get somewhere that would guarantee you successful future. And it was like, what kind of, this is nuts. Like, nobody was really looking at, are you ready? What do you feel about, the future? How do you take responsibility for getting up every day and going through? Because again, everything was becoming pressure, pressure, pressure. So that's why we got into how we delved into this subject, and we looked at everything. Looked at drinking and substance use on campuses. We looked at the rise of screen time and how that was dominating campus life. We looked at the effects of the some of the world events that were happening, and we realized, like, hey, this is parenting nowadays is different It's just not the same. Um, People's lives are, again, the motives are still the same. We love our kids. We want them to feel safe and want them to feel successful. We want to help them grow up. But all of the context itself is much less certain, much less predictable. And that was the main message of the stressed years was life is curvy, folks. Don't think it's a straight line and get ready for like a roller coaster. With practical solutions. But all the cases we write in each book, they're based on cases that we've been, obviously they've been changed so that people are not, identified. But the themes and the ways, the strategies that we had for helping families understand what was going on, that's, I think, the other important approach we use, which is using plenty of cases to illustrate how we think parents can be more effective, you know.
We I we can't we can't talk about older adolescent and young adult mental health, behavioral health without talking about the parenting piece. Because they
Exactly.
haven't fully launched yet. They're not fully autonomous, far away from home. And so one of the things that also stood out to me in You're Not Done Yet, which was your most recent book, I think from March of this year, 2024. You all, I think, cited one of the maybe a trend from your first book, 2019, to this book, where a lot of the metrics have not gone down; they've increased in terms of young adult anxiety,
Yeah.
but also parent anxiety, specifically mothers, I think you cited,
Yes.
have like significant, maybe even statistically significant
Right.
increase in anxiety. Um, how did you all decide to write this new book, You're Not Done Yet, so quickly after the previous book? Because there, I mean, that previous book is still pretty evergreen. There's still plenty of uh actionable, important information that's very relevant still. And to write another big book with so much information in it, that's quite an endeavor, especially I assume that during COVID and after COVID period of time. So how did this book emerge?
Um, COVID was certainly a precipitant, um, because our literary agent was like, "Oh my God, like people are going like, what's normal? What's going to be normal again? Can you guys write about what's going to be normal again?" And we were like, "We don't know what's going to be normal again. What can we write about?" So, so Tony, just a brief introduction and then take it away. Um, I had a few pet peeves myself. One is that I was very tired of parents, especially moms. Hey, P.S. I'm a mom. Um, Getting very short shrift for either they'd done it wrong, they'd missed the boat, they'd been too involved, they hadn't been involved enough. Like, hold on, let go. It was very confusing advice for parents, expert advice, advice from the court of public opinion. And I thought, you know what? What on earth do parents do who don't have my training and background? Because at that time, my own young adults had emerged from college, and it was not a world that they thought they were going to get from getting a college degree. It was like, what, kind of what happened to all the promises of adulthood? This is not as advertised. So I thought, oh my God, they're right.
Hmm.
And one of them was much more vociferous than the other. But the older one had dropped out of college and just said, I don't need this. Like, I can write a novel without getting an English degree. And my English professor agrees with me. I'm like, okay, what are you going to do for a day job? So we went in an entirely different direction, which goes a little bit into like, how do you make a decision? We can come back to that. But I would say COVID was a precipitant, and also then the changes, the enormous uncertainty that COVID dumped on parents, on young adults, and college students who went into, many of them just graduated from their first year, which was spent virtually. So Tony,
Yeah.
what would you
Well,
say?
and look, so time moved forward 5 years. Things got worse from the standpoint of recognizing youth mental health crisis. We were also impressed with the fact that more and more kids were coming home. And in my own family and in the families of patients, parents were asking new questions. It wasn't, how do I get my kid ready to leave to go to college? It's, what do I do now that they've come back? And how do we not frame that as, like what we say, it's a boomerang or it's, quote, failure to launch? I mean, we didn't want those phrases. We didn't want negativity. We wanted to look deeper and say, this is a reality. What do you do about it? So we both looked, and again, deeply into the larger social trends. But when we looked at our own cases and the people we were working with, and asked this question, what do you do when things aren't going according to plan? And how do we learn to adapt and be more flexible in the face of these milestones not being met? So we described, of course, how this whole notion of young adulthood and reaching adulthood as a goal, you were supposed to do that by your mid-20s? No way. And the data has shown that it takes for some people into their mid-30s to achieve
Yeah.
full financial independence, being able to have a career and have your own place and have a partner and raise your kid. Those classic milestones were no longer tenable. And at the same time, what we were hearing was that parents were feeling shamed or
Mhm.
feeling blamed by a society that said, what's wrong with you? Why isn't your kid already, successful? And that's a terrible burden, because not only are you worried about your own child's future and of current state of mind, not only do you have to adapt to them needing more from you than you expected, which hence you're not done yet, but how do you talk about it with your friends and other people? And what we said is, wait a minute, that whole mindset of this should have happened yesterday is not only not realistic, it's destructive. It's destructive because it makes the kid feel like a failure. It makes the parents feel like a failure. And then they try to sort of bootstrap it real fast when, you know what, maybe you just step back a bit and just kind of give people a little chance to figure it out together, because it takes more effort and time to solve some of these problems than we would like, but that's just the reality.
I forget where it was, but you all talked about the idea of like this is not linear. It's not
Yeah.
prescriptive. Um, what strikes me from my work and also people that I work with, colleagues, but also interviews I've done, um, is that we think that this current iteration of the world, and our focus is college, young adult, it's always been this way. It's only been this way for a few decades. This is all brand new relative to the software that we're carrying on our shoulders,
Yeah.
which is a few 100,000 years old. Um, the idea of going to college is totally modern and new. Most people were working with their hands forever and ever.
Right.
And so I love it that you'll in the book there's kind of this theme throughout, which is this is not prescriptive, this is not linear, what we've been taught. And so, like, Tony, to your point, you use the term like adaptive. It seems like this is one of the themes of this book seem to be you have to adapt, and here are ways to adapt. But even what you all are saying is not prescriptive. It's just an observation that there are different ways to handle some of these older stressors, but also new stressors too.
Well, why don't you speak about this issue of the multi-generational family as a family structure that really was the majority in for most of our human existence, right?
It was until the 1940s, and then the 1940s, really until about 5 years ago. And it was building and preceded COVID, but COVID just kind of highlighted everything, and people started noticing. Basically, World War II, when you think about like the historic trend, World War II, you know, America became the superpower economically, politically. You know, basically, it had, there was no competition. So those of us who like were smart enough to be born after World War II, very soon after, me and Tony, were like, you're golden, right? We didn't know it at the time. We just thought, oh, this is normal. It was so not normal because I mean the economics allowed people to, you know, have bigger families, so you had a lot of siblings, and you basically look to your peers and your siblings for guidance. Your parents were not intensive parenting. They were like, go out, have fun, come home before dark, right? It was there was not a lot of pressure. You may Parents may have had hopes and expectations for their kids. The kids had more choices in terms of where they went to school, what they did, whether they went to college. There was just a tiny minority of students who went to college up until the 1980s when Ronald Reagan came out with College for All. Why? Because we were behind in the Soviet era space race. So what happened with College for All is that federal support pretty largely dropped out of funding college. So by the 1990s, parents and their students were on their own to afford college. Meanwhile, college costs went up and up and up, while the subsidies went down. And community colleges were underfunded and weren't well connected to the four-year system. But beyond that, kids didn't really understand you don't have to go to college. Your aptitude may lie in working with your hands or in doing a technical job that really doesn't require a BA. But partly, and these are just, it's partly the larger socioeconomic trends drove degree inflation. So we don't think about that consciously, like how did we get here? But basically what happened is that there was recessions in 2000, the dot-com bubble, and then 2008 financial crisis, and employers kept cutting jobs. How did they rehire, or how did they define their criteria? By saying you have to have a college degree. Hello, like actually you didn't, but what you had been a high school diploma, adequacy, and educational qualification became obsolete. And it basically made people, especially young people and their parents, feel more and more and more pressured to get it right. It led to performance, a kind of performative self, as Tony referred to. For the students, they felt now even the privileged, quote unquote, material privileged, I say quote unquote, they're materially resourced, but the downside is that they feel extremely frightened to make a mistake. Like they're going to fall off the charted path to the good life if they don't pick the right major, the right this, which is absurd to think people are going to know this by age 18 or 20, except for maybe those very few mission driven people who kind of have it in their head since they're 5 years old. I'm going to be fill in the blank when I grow up. So it, largely what happened is that individuals, whether they were students or parents, found themselves kind of going through a narrowing path to the good life and more anxious about, are we doing the right things? Or have we prepared enough? Have we done enough? And so purpose and meaning kind of lost the college function of like pursue purpose and meaning, which was the era I grew up in, which is like it kind of didn't matter where you went. It kind of didn't matter like what you did as your first job or second job, because you figured, you didn't even figure, it was just like, well, then I'll try something else. It was not a pressured existence. So part of what's changed, and we want parents and young adults and adolescents to know, is that we as individuals can recognize this is not a generational fault. We can not stereotype each other generationally as like, oh, great, you handed me like a world on fire. Oh, it's your generation who are excellent sheep and not like kind of living up to what I did in my 20s. Stereotyping each other, blaming each other in that shame blame game is so destructive, and the generations actually benefit enormously by being involved. Intensive parenting has had its critics, but it has been crucial in helping young adults through their 20s and into their 30s. And what we've lost sight of that really has been true for millennia is that parents have always helped their young adult launch. It just looked different than it does today.
Can I just, I want to just
Oh
add
yeah,
one
go ahead, Tony.
coda
Yeah.
to that, which is that in this transition then from those sort of less intensive days, laissez-faire, open-ended, you can do what you want, to this intensive parenting. Everything matters. Don't make a mistake. You've got to like get into the best school, or you've got to find the right profession, and you've got to go there. What's been lost in that process then is some of the joy of just not knowing what's going to happen, and just like learning to live in the unknown without that fear. And then the other point, which is that young people need a time to explore. And so we pretty much advocate that this notion of, in order to go through this phase we call young adulthood, you have to have that support around you and that reserve of kind of mental energy to try this or to try that. And if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world, right? If you were going for medical school and you didn't pass organic chemistry, all right, you don't have to. But literally, this notion that there's more than one path to happiness, and that you don't have to go in that one narrow path that you and your parents have decided. That sort of conversation we think needs to happen over and over again. Hey, if it doesn't work out here, you can do it in a different path. And parents are, I think, really seeing how important they are to kids, but they're changing role. I think the main difference when you parent a young adult is you're not trying to solve their problems. You're not trying to give them the answers. You're not trying to program their day. In fact, you have to refrain from solving and doing and answering all those questions. And you have to be nearby, but it's a different role. And parents weren't prepared for that because they were expecting, hey, I set you on your path and you're launched. And guess what? So we like to say that we go from this notion of the empty nest to the open nest. The nest is open. Whenever you need to come back to it, come back to it. You know, it's open. It's not about you are somehow to be faulted for not knowing where you want to go next. Come back home, figure it out if that's a place you want to be. It help you figure it out.
This makes me think of uh, Nassim Taleb's book Anti-Fragile,
Mhm.
where he talked about economic systems and how our economic system was so much more precarious than we realized because it actually was a fragile system.
Mhm.
It wasn't even a resilient system, and it was fragile because banks didn't have enough liquidity to
Yep.
cover, when things went sour. Um, and it it makes me see an analog to young adults. Tony, B, the way you're describing, like we need to let kids kind of be out in the world and mess up and fall down and scrape their knees and stuff like that. We're over parenting, we're protecting them too much, and so they're actually not developing any distress tolerance.
Mhm.
And therefore they're not becoming anti-fragile. They're not actually learning and growing from adversity.
Mhm.
And they're not even resilient, which is more like a brick wall that doesn't develop and grow stronger. They're fragile.
Yes. Yeah.
um and I see that theme also through the book, and I hear you all talking about that kind of in your own language. B, one of the other things that I really appreciate talking with you right now is I can hear the marriage and family background that you have.
Mhm.
You bringing in the sociological aspects of the where the individual winds up from a family system and a societal
Right.
context, I think is um, not only refreshing, I think it's really important. I think that context matters so much. Um, and I love the way you built from the 1940s
Mhm.
and how you framed all that, because I think that that's so important to understand like where we came from and how all of this has not always been this way, you know.
it really has not been this way for long. And I think what I sometimes felt, even as I found myself confused, in this kind of, it felt like one of my kids was supposed to, launch, and it was all these parents and all these kids his age in a waiting room, and we're all fogged in, like the plane was not taking off. And the waiting room got more and more and more crowded. And it was as if, it went from like it's foggy to like, oh, something was really wrong. How did we not see like how this was like rolling in over, because it rolled in really over decades. But first parents just felt like it was their fault, that they'd done something wrong. What else were they supposed to do? And I think it helps to have a broader perspective, historical perspective, even to say, we have the consequence as individuals and as families. And what Tony and I write about is how can we as individuals and as families support each other, be there for each other, kind of be mindful of like, this is not a stereotypic notion of let's blame you or let's blame me. How can we, even at a societal level, take a different position about what's healthy, not just for my tribe, but for everyone? And so I think that there is a tendency to, blame ourselves as parents in order to find fault with our kids. Why haven't you done this or that? And, one of the mistakes that we encourage parents not to make is don't use a blueprint from your college years or your young adulthood, because your kid has like about 5% chance of hitting those markers. It's like, no, the generational baton pass takes a decade longer than it took in the past. So some parents were like, whoa, that's not, I didn't sign up for that. That's not how it's supposed to be. It's kind of like, well, let's help you adapt. Because one of the other things that Tony and I write about that you mentioned earlier is that parents' mental health has hit historic and unprecedented high rates of anxiety and depression. And the youth mental health crisis, which is now being recognized and addressed even at a national level, which is a good thing. But it's kept going. It's not like those kids are gone, I'm a young adult now, I'm fine. They're not fine. And parents are actually in the new sandwich generation of like, they are more often caregivers to their young adults than they are to their elderly parents. But P.S., elderly folks have a lot more federal subsidies for their care than parents of young adults have. So I feel tremendously, sympathetic to parents who are struggling hard. They're maintaining sometimes both generations, their young adults and their elderly parents, while they've also been burdened, by job issues from COVID and just all the uncertainties that there are to manage and the questions that they don't know how to respond to their young adults about what just happened. And so I really think that part of it is we spend some part of You're Not Done Yet to help parents understand what is self-care. It's not just a bromide, go to a spa. What can you do every day that builds in something that helps you keep going, that helps you take a breath? And part of what we're trying to reassure parents is that, yes, sometimes young adults really do hit mental health stumbling blocks. Here's what they look like. Here's what the common ones are. Here's how to get help. Here's what to look for, because probably you are going to be their search navigators. Young adults have no idea where to turn. In fact, like a huge number, like 35%, don't get mental health needs met because they don't know where to look. So we spend a chunk of the book helping people understand, like, okay, here's where the breadcrumb trail is to get help for yourself, to get help for your young adult or your college student as needed, because parents are tasked with a lot and their role has been extended in a way that many, many of them had never imagined it would be.
And this is where B and I are very critical of some of the models of care that are out there that suggest that parents should be excluded when young adults look for help. Now, sometimes that's enshrined in law too, or in regulations, HIPAA, this and that. But, the model that somehow parents are toxic and your role as a therapist is to help this young person find who they are and keep the parents out of the conversation is in my mind, again, is really wrong-headed. Because number one, young people need their parents. Number two, if they're having trouble, it's affecting their parents. And whatever trouble parents are having is affecting them. So clinicians need to be engaged in thinking about the family. Now, does that mean everybody should become a family therapist? No, but if you're working with a young adult, you ought to be able, you ought to have a relationship with the family. Like you need to know who they are. What are they up to? What do they think is going on? And then if you're not going to take them on as a therapist, then find someone who can, because this is not an individual pathology, approach that works. Okay.
No,
It just doesn't work at this stage. And it probably never works, but it's funny. We would accept family therapy as a concept if the kid is still at home, but now they go off to college mental health doesn't want to work with the families. That was what the stressed years was about, was
yeah,
hold on. If your kid's in college and they're in trouble, don't, first of all, you can't even count on what help they're getting will help.
right,
Secondly, you shouldn't be excluded. You should be included at some
right,
degree, under prizing, at least, the very least, what can you do to be helpful? All right.
right,
And you're also going to need help, by the way, with a sense of blame or a sense of failure. That faces every parent with a child with mental health challenges feels they did something wrong. That's just a given, and that's a painful reality. How do we help people overcome that sense of being inadequate as parents? Then you add to that, now they're done with college. Now they're supposed to be on their own, and anybody will say, "Ah, I can't see the family. They're 22 years old. They're 24 years old." What makes that suddenly they're 24, you shouldn't look at the family? So we're really in great conflict with models of care that don't consider family intervention of whatever kind suits the family, but including whoever is part of the family. And it could be the siblings, it could be whoever is a supportive person in this young person's life needs to be summoned into the room and say, hey, and it has to be with the young person's approval, right? If they don't want that, then
right,
we've got a little bit of a complicated story there. And then there's still models of working. One works with the young person, the other works with the parents, and those two people talk. Okay, so there's really no one size fits all, but I have to say again and again, this lack of experience in dealing with families of young adults among clinicians is, in my way of thinking, a big deficit in our training programs.
I
And I just,
I
and I really feel like that's another, if you were to say, what are we calling for underneath it all? Yeah, parents, learn to take care of yourself, learn to find out where you can get good help, join parent groups that support you as a parent. But what we really think has to happen is the professions of psychology, psychiatry, social work, and other mental health professionals, counselors, all need to get better at talking with families and engaging families.
I Tony, I really like that point, and it makes me think. It makes me move away from looking at the client, the young adult, the college student, or even the family or the parents, and turn it towards the clinician. And I wonder how much of this is also a clinician issue in terms of comfort. Um,
totally.
it's so messy working with families. It's
It,
so messy. And I would, you know what? I'm gonna hide behind HIPAA. Um, they're over 18. I can't even acknowledge that your son is a client of mine right now. You know, but I wanna go back to campus for a second. Um, what should colleges and universities be doing differently? And maybe that's an unfair question to you all. And if you want to punt, that's fine.
Well, no,
Um,
they're trying their best at this moment. I'll jump in for a second because I'm part of a group called the Higher Education Mental Health Alliance. And we're dealing with multiple fires on multiple places in the college scene right now. We're working on a manual towards a trauma-informed campus, because what we think is that this generation in particular is highly exposed to trauma, both direct and indirect, and that colleges have ceased being as safe as I mean, they were never fully safe, but there's a level at this point of disruption to the sort of notion of campus as a community, and we think that the threats to that community are making mental health worse for people who already are vulnerable. So, what can campuses do? Well, first of all, they are doing more and more to try to spawn wellness efforts, right? Prevention, learn to take care of yourself. They are also sponsoring more access to counseling and trying to increase the access to, say, when people have serious problems and need medication or time off, getting those additional help as available as possible. It's still a big lift. Colleges can't afford to offer these services, so a lot of this falls on the private health insurance industry, and those insurers are variable in their willingness to really get people what they need. But that's a whole other conversation. What colleges need to do more of, number one, is they need to include parents more in what's going on with their kid when their kid is having trouble. That has got to be a much less onerous task than it seems to be. Like in B's son's case, I mean, the counselor didn't know what was going on, but once they didn't make it easy for him and for his family to decide what to do. They were like of no help. And that's that's obviously an indictment, I'm saying, of college campus services if they don't have a good, and I think many of them are developing this, instead of seeing the family as the problem, like, oh, we've got to get with the family. Oh my God, that's a problem. They have to see the family as part of the solution. And then the other thing I think campuses need to do, and B can speak to this, is prepare kids for the work world.
Mm-hmm.
Get them thinking about careers, get them exposed to real live learning opportunities. So campuses that do this, like Drexel and Northeastern, where they give kids work experience while they're in school, I think have a vast advantage in preparing kids for the future over campuses that do nothing of the kind. But I'll let B's really looked into this issue of the career guidance or the lack of it in colleges.
Thanks, Tony. First of all, I wholeheartedly agree with you about our profession as not seeing parents as resources, and sometimes, to your point, Rob, kind of hiding behind like HIPAA, like blah, or I don't have permission because they don't have the training, and families are. I mean, that's why family therapy training can really be about a 10-year endeavor. It certainly was for me to feel comfortable with, like, I've seen enough and done enough. I can, like, kind of catch the pop-up fly. So to add to what can colleges do, I would really recommend that all colleges, and this costs them absolutely zero money, send out a letter with whatever acceptance letter they send out to say, we strongly encourage you, fill in the blank person, and your parents to have a discussion about signing a HIPAA waiver. Should anything happen to you at our college, we will need permission to contact your next of kin, your da 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 da. Please have a discussion about this, because what parents often do not know is after 18, they are out of luck in terms of getting anybody to talk to them unless the HIPAA waiver has been signed. And so you want to be able to talk about it in a constructive way with your, off to college, if that's where they're going, student, before something nightmarish happens. And I don't use nightmarish to scare people. It's just kind of like, you don't know. They don't know what happens. It's kind of like, you don't want to have to make a snap decision when anyone's in distress. Do it ahead of time. Do it before your kid goes away from home, if they're going away from home. So that's a zero cost enterprise. And in that way, the college covers themselves, but also it's really in the best interest of the student as well as the parent to have, access when or if needed, which we all hope doesn't happen, but like we don't know. In terms of the other issues, I have seen colleges do really, really interesting things with peer support groups, which also are very low fee to run. It's not a one-to-one relationship. Here's a peer support group that supports, let's say, learning difficulties. Here's a peer support group that supports first generation students. Here's support. And so it's kind of like peers mentoring peers, but it's usually an older, let's say, level student mentoring a younger level student, or with groups who basically go, been there, done that. That's kind of normal. Don't worry. You're like, whoa, that's pretty out coloring outside the lines. You better take a look at this. So peer support is also all students at this age and development, they want to belong. They want to fit in. They want to feel like I'm keeping up, with my other students. And when they feel the most vulnerable, they're not going to go talk. Well, maybe girls will, boys won't. Boys, even if they eke out I'm having a rough time, the usual response is, sorry, buddy, let's go get a beer. It's not what's happening. So, so peer support groups can be a very low cost way to, and also this sounds odd, but colleges also on high stress days, they bring support animals to campus, like pet a dog, pet, whatever. So they bring support animals because they are sometimes more comforting than talking to people because they don't say stupid things to you. So there's lots of different what I'm going to call like low cost strategies that because colleges, honestly, I regard college mental health as kind of like the three-legged stool for the student and the parents, because at least there's a place where to go. They may not be able to see you as long as you need to be seen. They may have to transfer you out, but at least you get to see somebody sooner than later. And it is a bit of a search navigator. They've often done the homework for you to go, here's our list of professionals in the area who will probably work with your insurance company or cut you a break. Or so they've done a resource finding for the student. So I regard that as a period of time where students actually are better resourced, but it's after they leave college that like it's no longer a three-legged stool of support, and parents are really much more on the front line and are crucially needed on the front line just to make sure that, because parents serve as financial advisors to their young adults, they serve as emotional sounding boards, they serve as kind of, can I tell you what's just gone wrong? So most young adults they turn to their mothers more than their fathers. We could help fathers like boost. Most fathers want to help more than they're asked to. But kids have their parents kind of pigeonholed between, well, mom was one who kissed my knee when I fell down. Okay, I'm going to tell mom. So, but we can help kids and parents kind of become, if they're fortunate enough to have more than one adult in their life to turn to really, kind of pull as a team. That's what we'd like to see.
The other
I like, oh,
the
go
other
ahead,
thing
Tony.
I
I'm
want
sorry.
to add is that college counseling programs are in a crisis recruiting people right now. The job of being a counselor or a therapist on the campuses is a really tough job. Their
Yeah,
caseloads have gone up. The, the severity of the people they're seeing has gone up.
right.
Situations they're put in terms of crisis is really stressful for them. And they're leaving. They're actually not getting enough counselors. So not only I think is it a very stressful job to work in a college mental health center right now, it's gotten worse. But then, as you know, you got schools facing budget crunches and all the rest. The real decision for college presidents is how do we keep these efforts going? So I do think that Most colleges are trying to include parents. Like when a student is in crisis at Penn, the crisis team does reach out to the family, okay, to say, look, we got a problem here. But it ought to have been maybe a little sooner than when the kid is like has to withdraw. It's a matter of changing the practices, and they're starting to do that. But I think it's like I said earlier, the level of the distress and the level of the complexity of that distress is not adequately resourced to deal with on the part of the professional staff. And even though they'll say, we'll send you to community resources, yeah, there are a lot of colleges where there's not a whole lot of community resources around.
Right.
So therefore, they're in a catch-22. So just to finish up, I do think the notion that the cost of college is another factor that we haven't talked about. But when students are having trouble and they know they're costing their families a lot of money, it intensifies their distress. And once again, I think the cost of a college education is, in many cases, prohibitive. So
Right.
we've got that added stress on the kid and on the parents. And again, I think my way of thinking, hopefully there'll be some reforms to the way that college is funded.
Right.
But until there is, the big burden falls on individual families.
P.S. I have one more P.S. Sorry, we're on a roll here. The other thing that parents should do is look up what's called the FERPA relationship of the professors to the mental health system at college, because professors have more of a bead on, is this kid missing class routinely? Is this kid looking like something is really falling apart? And so they're the people day to day that see the student. And yet, depending, and every college handles this differently, depending on the college. And that's just something a student and a parent should know, because parents no longer are quote unquote entitled to see the grades. So your kid can flunk out. In fact, I've seen college students who lied to their parents for over a year that they were going to college when they were not. And the parents never knew that, I mean, until like, kind of next tuition bill rolled around. They never knew because there was no alert to anyone that the kid was not going to class. So FERPA is another. HIPAA, HIPAA, and FERPA, FERPA.
I'll make sure to put that in the show notes because that's um I think that's a super important
That's a key resource yeah.
inflection point.
Mm-hmm.
And B, I like your suggestion too, that no cost, low cost. I'd never thought of that before, embedding a release of information right in the acceptance letter because
Yep.
it's setting a tone that
Yep.
we take this seriously. We don't want control and oversight. We want a continuity of care.
Right.
And also from a business perspective, there's the freshman year retention problem. And
Exactly.
so
But
it, it,
Yep.
it serves colleges really well to promote some
Definitely.
wellness.
yeah, it does. Yeah, no, it's a win-win, solution that is not hard to implement, low cost, no cost, and would help students and families too. Yeah.
I know that in a lot of departments, the faculty that I know in many universities and colleges, I talk often with faculty, and the conversation I have with them is, uh, be like you said, I've got way more students that need help than I know what to do with. I'm not a mental health professional, but I'm tasked as acting as a social worker in my classroom. And when I go to the chair of my department, they tell me to just refer to CAPS, counseling and psychological services. And so it's really just a lot of punting that's going on, it seems, not in all colleges and universities. But I think there are a lot of faculty that want to do more, but
Yeah.
they're already stretched as well because they have a lot of service requirements within their departments.
Yeah.
They're trying to do research. They're preparing for classes. they're also not mental health professionals.
Right.
But they are uh, a part of this landscape where there are a lot of people that have responsibility for mental behavioral health mitigation, but have no training in it.
Even if they had a very simple report that went to the college mental health system that said, FYI, if so and so is a client there, they are missing, 5 out of 10 of my classes, lectures. Like, even if it were an attendance report,
But you see,
because,
the reason that that doesn't happen
yeah,
is the assumption that colleges make that once you're in college, you're not in high school anymore. And that nobody, parents don't deserve to be told, did your kid come to class or not?
right.
And so we have a mismatch. What I think B and I were hinting at, and, or maybe even being very explicit in the stressed years, is that kids are going off to school not really fully prepared to take responsibility for their lives, whether it's studying, sleeping enough, taking care of their bodies, and managing their social demands. So colleges still have the expectation of the 1950s and 1960s. You've come here, you're a grown up now. And that's not to say that a lot of college students aren't there. A lot of them are, maybe even most of them. But there's a substantial number who are academically prepared, but not social, emotional, and from the standpoint of executive functioning skills, ready to manage their time and organize themselves. And they don't all have, I mean, obviously, if they have ADHD or some other executive functioning deficits, that's already going to make it harder. But a lot of them just never had practice because during the pandemic and around growing up, they were getting this handling of all of their time and organization was being sort of subsidized, supervised, and in a sense supported by parents and their scaffolding. So you remove the scaffolding, you go off to school, and the school says it's not our responsibility to tell the parents that your kid didn't come to class. Well, that's true. That's how they see it. Is that going to work for, the young person? The very least, I think, is that if the student is assigned to go to the learning center or the place where they have to go and take sort of organizational help, any kind of help they're getting, I think that should be sort of, yeah, the contract with your kid and you as a parent is if they've got the accommodation to go to that learning center or to go to the counseling center, that if they're not going, that the parent be notified of that fact.
Mhm.
Whether they're going or not to class, I don't think colleges are going to do that so quickly. But at the very least, hey, your kid was supposed to come in every week to go over their, like how they're doing with their keeping track of their time and their planner and doing assignments. They're not showing. Well, that's maybe that ought to be added there as a part of the contract. Now, will they do that? Who knows? But I always tell kids, if you're going to school and you don't show up at these extra sessions that you've got for yourself, you're sort of depriving yourself of what you really can see as an additional benefit. You're getting a benefit and you're not using it. It's like throwing money away, because somebody's being paid to take this on and to help you. And I think that it's a good predictor of who's going to succeed or not in freshman year in college is, do they go to class and do they go to their assigned, say, learning center person or organizational skills coach? And you know this, Rob, this is your field, right? I mean, people need the coach to keep them going. And we know that coaching, ADD coaching, for example, works really well as long as the person takes advantage of it especially in college.
I want to be respectful of your time. We could keep talking for several more hours. Before we started recording, we were talking about, and Tony, you had said something along the lines of we were talking about employment and the future of mental health. And I'd like to steer it towards, what are you all optimistic about? And I'd like to somehow tie together career, even though I don't know if optimism is maybe the most appropriate way to think about it because of AI and a lot of changes that are happening in society.
Well, can I
And
make us, let me addend it. I don't think it's optimism. I think it's hope. There's a difference. Okay.
okay, all right.
Optimism is saying everything's going to work out. Hope is the belief that whatever is going on, you can figure out what to do to improve your chances of getting through the crisis or getting to your goals. Okay. So, hope, I think, what gives me hope is that we're talking about it. You're having that these podcasts and that these conversations are happening, that people are being more open to looking at the problem in a deeper way and not trying to, you know, do a quick fix on something that's deeper. What gives me hope is that young people want to live a better life and want to see the world be a better place. And that the importance of, I think, of social media and helping us to recognize that, apart from all that stupid stuff, whether it's, selling things or the false stuff that's on there, the deep fakes, obviously those are all worrisome. But to me, the hope is that young people take the world just as seriously as we did when we were young, as a place that they want to make, their home and they want to have an impact on. And so, I mean, I'm very hopeful also that families want to do the same. So there's the stigma itself, even though it's there, a lot of it has been brought down to the level where it's not as bad. It's still there, but it's miles and miles better, that we can teach people through these means, through books, through podcasts, through films, and through conversations, that there are better ways to live if you're willing to learn and to be curious and ask questions and to create, I think, a shared sense of ownership of this problem, that it's. And I think the last thing I'll say, and I'll turn it over to B, is I'm hopeful that parents themselves can be a force for change, that they can be mobilized to demand something different from healthcare and from colleges and from the society as a whole, and say, hey, this is a tough job. We should be supported more than we've been.
So I want to say thank you, Tony. I'm signing on to all that. And it is our hope and mission to make those ideas accessible to more people. To go, Rob, to your question about colleges and careers and that sort of thing, just briefly and more specifically, the colleges have finally taken note. They're very, very slow to change because their systems have worked for so long, like why change it, right? But increasingly they've come under scrutiny about this is not working. There is a breakdown between what does your degree get you? People, a huge number of high schoolers now, like 2/3, are questioning whether they'll get a 4-year degree. So colleges are facing a kind of birth dearth, as well as this crisis in like, is college really worth it? And they have amped up their game. They are introducing, as Tony said, more co-op programs, more internships, more paid college to credit work earning kind of explorations, which gives young people a lot more chances to try out a field, to go, is this going to really be something I want to do or not, rather than spending 4 years getting a degree and then finding out they don't want to do it. So, or it's not an easy aptitude for them. So to divert to an individual level for a minute, parents and students can sign up to get aptitude testing. What is that? Aptitude testing is different than IQ. We can be however smart we are, but we're smart in strengths and weaknesses. So the aptitudes are the skills and the abilities that come by us kind of more naturally. There's more ease and efficiency in learning something, and we'll enjoy it more. So we are going to stick with things we enjoy more. That may not be the same, and often isn't, as what did you get a good grade in high school or freshman year? Okay, we'll make that your major. that is actually not a good predictor at all for what your career is going to be or what your job path is. So the more exploratory we can be, the more we can be guided by what are my aptitudes. Again, different than what were my grades, different than what they teach formally in school. A lot of the jobs out there, they don't teach in school. So, or in college. So those are different things that parents can do, but colleges have certainly taken note that they need to have the public trust more that the education that someone gets will be personally meaningful, gratifying, and lead to a job that they want to do. So that's it in a nutshell.
Excellent. Um, I appreciate you all spending so much time with me. Thank you for coming on and talking about your backgrounds and both of the books. I'm going to make sure that everything that we talked about is identified and clearly labeled within the show notes so that people can find out about some of the stuff that we talked about. What is the best way for folks to get a hold of each of you if they are curious and interested in learning more about you all?
They could get hold of both of us as speakers under macmillanspeakers.com, which is the publisher of our books. And if they want to get hold of me by website, it would be b@drbhibbs.com. But I would send them to the speakers page because that's where we list what we've talked about, where we've gone, done talks and that sort of thing. And certainly we appreciate very much your having us on today, Rob. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I really, I think another way to get a hold of me would be through LinkedIn. That my website, I mean, I don't have a website like B, but I'm on LinkedIn, so that's my one social media presence. And you can also contact me at Cooper if there's a, but we're not here to take on more patients. So that's the one caveat because like our practices are we're quite full. But talking to groups, yeah, and I think Macmillan is the best way to do that. And I do want to thank you, Rob. This is really a thought-provoking conversation. You're incredibly insightful and ask great questions. And this was a wonderful opportunity to explore some important ideas.
Well, I think I benefited way more than you all did. So so I appreciate your time and hopefully we can catch up again soon.
Yeah,
Thanks so much.
yeah.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Take care.
Hey everyone, before you head off, I just wanted to say thanks for tuning in today. All of the resources discussed are in the show notes below. And one last thing, if you know anyone that would benefit from this episode, please forward it along. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to my podcast, YouTube channel, and newsletter. See you all next time.